The primary purpose of making a YouTube channel is to share videos with others, whether for entertainment, education, personal expression, or to build a community around a shared interest. Additionally, YouTube channels can serve as a platform for monetizing content, increasing brand visibility, generating leads, and fostering collaboration with other creators. If things work out right, this will be my 17th video on the channel, which has been based solely on one of, if not my biggest interest in the world, football. Football has had an integral part of my life since the age of 7, in finding an identity, making friends, and releasing any anger I have held within me, scapegoating any due events from overcooking a roast or not receiving a tax rebate. However, football is not the only thing I am heavily interested in, and to an extent, it's a shame that YouTube does not necessarily facilitate an algorithm which can attract a multitude of diverse fans upon various interests around the world. You would not necessarily stumble across a YouTube channel who visits one-star hotels for the sole purpose of playing tiddlywinks, or visit every single kebab shop in London in order to finally use the Ouija board, which has been collecting dust in your attic for 14 years, to speak to previous owners. With this in mind, whether this video is popular or not, YouTube has become a safe haven for me to talk about my thoughts, feelings and opinions on the world. I like therapy, only this time it costs time and not money. Not only do I love football, but as you've already seen by the title and thumbnail of this video, I also love Pokemon. I know, a somewhat 30-year-old loving Pokemon? Grow up! Well, let me answer back with one of the most powerful proverbs in the history of our planet. Get stuffed. That, and more so for men, we don't grow up, we just grow old. Pokemon has been an interest since the days of me entering primary school. For you non-UK viewers, that's from the age of 7. I'll always remember my first ever Pokemon card too, which was a male Nidoran, which I got from a mate back in the day, and never looked back onto it also having an integral part of my life. Sorry Digimon, you missed the cut. Football and Pokemon, one could perceive, are worlds apart in familiarity. There are no football-specified Pokemon, and there isn't much pull on Pokemon, more so from burly 50-year-old men whose Saturday afternoons consist of screaming profanities at the opposition players and referee. Well, don't worry, for I am to break that mould, as I will be trying my best to represent each Premier League team with a Pokemon. As I am writing this, it is not yet decided whether Sunderland or Sheffield United are promoted to the Premier League, but I am sure once my script is finished, I will be able to add one or the other onto the list. Let's explain the regulations. The Premier League teams represented will be teams of the Premier League in preparation for the 2025-26 season. Any Pokemon could be represented for each club from Generation 1 to Generation 9. Yes, there are 9 generations of Pokemon now. Deciding what Pokemon represents each team could be relatable to a multitude of reasons. Geographical location, football team nickname, location history, and the like. So, let's get into it. Here is every Premier League club represented by a Pokemon. Arsenal, Tyrantrum. Arsenal, the team who is privileged to have finished second thrice in the Premier League, starts us off, and is probably the easiest inclusion in this list. Nicknamed the Gunners, there were a couple of inclusions which could have fitted the mould as to what Pokemon represents the North London Giants. Pokemon such as Remoraid or Octillery could have some resemblance to represent Arsenal, as Remoraid is somewhat resembling a barrel of a revolver, and Octillery has some fan drawing of resembling a tank. However, the very thing that represents Arsenal is sitting right in front of us. Gunnosaurus, the Arsenal mascot. As such, I feel Tyrantrum fits the mould, not only as a dinosaur, I like Gunnosaurus, but also adds a fitting colour to the scheme of Arsenal's and its rock typing, which seems, at least in my experience, what they use as a Wi-Fi point within the Emirates. Seriously, I can't even check sofa scores to see the other scores. Aston Villa, Pyro. As Aston Villa are one of the oldest and most successful clubs in England, it seems fitting that on their badge crest a lion represents the club, as it is one of a few nicknames, the Lions, for the Midland side, along with the Villains. Staying on the latter, Team Rocket is somewhat of a villain organisation within the Pokemon world, so Pokemon which they typically use could fit the mould. If you remember, the likes of Jesse and James, Arbok and Weezing could do the trick. However, sticking to the Lions, there are a few lion Pokemon to choose from. Arguably, Entei and Solgaleo are Pokemon resembling lions, and Litleo is a cute little lion cub. But as Aston Villa are one of the oldest clubs to represent the Premier League, we're going to use Litleo's evolution, Pyroar, for our list. Pyroar has two differing looks depending on its gender, and one could argue it looks 99.99% like an actual lion. However, there's one big difference. This one's on fire. What a charmer. Bournemouth, Cherubi. Bournemouth's nickname is the Cherries. So why wouldn't I use the cherry Pokemon? Sure, it could be associated with other fruit Pokemon like Bounsweet or Applin, or Pokemon most associated with the beach such as Palisand, or water Pokemon like Seadra. But why not hit the nail on the head with the most obvious relation between the two? Maybe, if Bournemouth start to win some cups and leagues, they could be represented by a fruit-like Pokemon with a bit more grit to it, unlike Cherubi. But in this case, maybe appreciating the cuter things are better in hindsight than having a fire lion. How lame. Brentford, Vespiquen. Another straightforward one, considering Brentford are nicknamed the Bees, as we have Vespiquen, the beehive Pokemon. We have other contenders for the role, such as Beedrill, which in of itself is an actual bee, but potentially we could also have Silvally, as it is the Pokemon, in my opinion, which near enough resembles a griffin, which is a shout out to the Griffin Park on one of the four corners when Brentford played their football at Griffin Park. Adding to the theme of bees, you also have Combee and Wabombi, which are also great arguments to have represent Brentford, but Vespiquen takes the lead in my opinion. Brighton, Wingull. It's a full circle situation here, as we have our thumbnail representation. For Brighton, we have Wingull, the seagull Pokemon. Back in the day, Dr. Richard Russell of Lewes in the 18th century essentially was telling everybody in the UK to go to Brighton to go into the sea for some form of water therapy, which for me didn't sweeten the deal, as there were no Pokemon to catch back then. Maybe in the imagination, but who was that forward thinking in the 1730s to use some electricity to create some pocket monsters? Following up on some seabird themes, we have Wingull's evolution Pelipper, Cramorant, or even Kilowattrel. But I couldn't possibly use any of those non-seagull specific Pokemon for Brighton instead of the actual seagull Pokemon. Easily the easiest inclusion yet. Burnley, Colossal. Hear me out. As the coal industry grew in the 16th and 17th centuries, Burnley was one of many locations within Lancashire which has set up many coal mines, such as the Bank Hill Colliery and the Black Clough Colliery. So, why not represent the location with the Pokemon, which in this case is Colossal, the coal Pokemon. Its pre-evolutions, Roly-Coly and Carkol, could definitely fit the mold too, but considering its description doesn't change as it evolves, unlike Cherubi evolving into Cherrim, the Blossom Pokemon, it seemed very fitting for the history of Burnley. Chelsea, Blastoise. The first water starter is blue. Chelsea, they play in blue, and their nickname is the Blues. Pretty much straightforward. I did notice, however, that another nickname for Chelsea was the Pensioners. And believe me, nobody wanted Chelsea to be represented by an old man as much as me, hence nearly changing this inclusion to Drampa, the placid Pokemon, but I feel it will be a bit more of a stretch compared to Blastoise, as it is the poster boy for the blue version of Generation 1 back in 1996. Crystal Palace, Braviary. The new FA Cup winners have an incredibly exceptional Pokemon to represent them, as I believe Braviary, the valiant Pokemon, could be perceived as the closest Pokemon to resemble an eagle. With a bit of a stretch, Timber or even Gerda could have somewhat of a decent shout to represent the South London side, as the original Hyde Park building, which was built in 1851 with iron, wood and glass, was named the Crystal Palace until it was perished by a fire in 1936. But the nickname will do just fine with this one. No messing about. Everton, Milcery. Considering Everton are known as the Toffees, maybe Milcery isn't a bad inclusion. Sure, you could also have chosen Slurpuff, the meringue Pokemon, or Serena, the fruit Pokemon, but I feel Milcery is most fitting to a nickname which is sweet. Founded in 1878, it fell short of 21 years to being the first football club to ever exist, which would have been fitting with Rhydon, the first Pokemon to ever be created. As such, a lot of these inclusions have involved the club's nickname, so why wouldn't it be relevant as such to relate a Pokemon to a football club's nickname? It's been rather straightforward up to this point. Fulham, Furfru. As arguably one of, if not the poshest football club in London, let alone England, let's go for Furfru, the poodle Pokemon. Fulham is generally regarded as an affluent and desirable area to live, not too far from Hammersmith in London, and it is perceived by many football fans of being a very posh club. It is seen to have a diverse fan base which includes actors, musicians, television personalities and sports figures. As such, Furfru fits the mould as a high-class pet. Surprisingly, with over 1,000 Pokemon, not one remotely looks like a cottage, but I'm sure most Pokemon will be able to live in one, given the circumstances of their space. Leeds, Ho-Oh. The nickname, the Peacocks, was rumoured to have been inspired by the first club colours of royal blue with yellow edgings. Also, the livery of the borough. Rugby was the most prominent sport in the Leeds area in the late 19th century. The bird was used as part of the badge which represented Leeds Athletic Football Club, once formed in 1919. However, in 1984, the badge had changed from including the bird to a Yorkshire White Rose, hence the additional nickname the Whites. Flabebe, in its white petal form, is a great inclusion to have for the change of nickname of Leeds, but I wanted to include a peacock-like Pokemon to represent what Leeds once was represented fully as, hence Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokemon. Appearing within the Pokemon anime in episode 1 back in 1999, Ho-Oh most resembles a peacock in my opinion, which hopefully you Leeds fans will appreciate more so, considering it is a legendary Pokemon. Liverpool, Salamence. Spinder was incredibly close to being added to this list in remembrance to Steven Gerrard's dizzying slip against Chelsea to end Liverpool's hopes of winning the Premier League in 2014. Nevertheless, given their recent triumph in winning their second Premier League title and their 20th top division title in all, maybe it is more so fitting to include a Pokemon that has won the most world competitions within Pokemon. The Pokemon World Championships is an e-sports event held annually for Pokemon players around the world to compete against each other. Since 2000, the Masters, there have been plenty of players who have entered the competition, but to this point in time, where there have been 14 separate winners, but was a massive gap between the 2000 and 2008 Worlds, where no competition took place. Altogether, 5 Pokemon take the helm of having the most wins within a team, which are the following: Cresselia, Incineroar, Amoonguss, Thunderous, and our selection for this list, Salamence. This was genuinely a matter of opinion, and I wanted to go for Salamence. Not as one of my favourite Pokemon, which is not the case, but more so exaggerating the perception of the liver bird on its crest into something more draconic. Man City, Persian. Whether you see this as a cultural background kind of inclusion, or one where cats are represented as symbolic figures historically, you can't knock the prospect of a Pokemon like Persian to not be associated with one of the richest clubs in England. Persian, in the anime, is a feline companion for the Team Rocket leader Giovanni, which could arguably have swayed my opinion heavily into immediately associating Man City with the classy cat Pokemon. Owned by Sheikh Mansour, who is the Vice President of the United Arab Emirates, this one definitely is speculative of what Pokemon could be most associated to the club, if Pokemon were real. In my opinion, not so much in terms of history of the like, but I firmly believe there are some powerful Pokemon who could fit this mould, such as Sigilyph, Indeedee, or even Gossifleur. I think it is a great delight to research and learn about culture around the world, more so in this case with the UAE, who in of itself is culturally diverse. So trying to think of certain Pokemon who could represent a sheik is culturally fascinating, even if it is solely to relate Pokemon to a football club. Man United, Houndoom. I could have easily included Giratina, the renegade Pokemon, or most people's favourite Charizard into the mix, but I thought Houndoom, the dark Pokemon, would be a decent fit for Manchester United. Don't get me wrong, I was compelled to elaborate as to why Man United wimped out on this season, finishing 15th and crashing out of the Europa League final in style, being owned by the worst kind of owners you can think of. But as much as I did not cancel out choosing a Pokemon with a team that has been underwhelming a majority of the season, I can't help but feel it would be a cop-out. Arguably, Manchester United have been one of the biggest juggernauts within English football, let alone Europe, for a majority of the 21st century. With Alex Ferguson, they have won the league 7 times since the turn of the century, and have a hand in winning both the Champions League and the Europa League to this point in time. As such, Houndoom seems a fine fit within some capacity for the Red Devils. Newcastle, Corvisquire. Newcastle United is nicknamed the Magpies due to their traditional black and white striped kit, which resembles the plumage of a magpie bird. This nickname has been in use since the club adopted the black and white stripes in 1894. The club's crest also features a magpie. So in great nickname Pokemon related spirit, we're going to go for Corvisquire. To a great extent, some of the Pokemon I've suggested with Manchester City could also be adopted for this inclusion. But the fact that Newcastle have an easier nickname to relate Pokemon to compared to the Citizens is a no-brainer. Nottingham Forest, Sudowoodo. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it just may be a duck. Likewise, if it looks like a tree, stands still like a tree, and prevents sound from being made when people are around it, it's a tree. Hence, Sudowoodo, the imitation Pokemon. Forests have trees. Thank you, that's my time. Tottenham, Combuskin. Believe me, I wanted to add Trubbish or Garbodor, but no! I have to be serious with this list. The cockerel on Tottenham's badge is a tough one to associate with Pokemon, but I think there's a line of Pokemon which could do it justice. In Generation 3, we have the Torchic line, which is the fire starter, Twisted Fire starter, of the generation. When they win the Premier League one day, hopefully not in my lifetime, they will be a Blaziken in my eyes. But right now, let's go for Combuskin, the middle stage evolution of the line. West Ham, Tinkertink. Irons! Irons! Is rather metal, one might say. So let's get a metalsmith into the mixer. Whether you wanted to add any of the evolution line into this list, be my guest. However, West Ham have not been a very good side this season, more so since Graham, mid-table mediocrity Potter, took charge. So why should West Ham be associated with a powerful metal worker like Tinkerton? If making this list was the season as when they won the Europa League Conference, I'd argue it should be Tinkertuff being highlighted. But West Ham have just been so utterly poor since Moyes left, so let's go with Tinker-Tink. Wolves, Lycanroc. It does what it says on the tin. I feel its midday form is most fitting to the colour scheme compared to its midnight and dusk forms. But unlike Tinker-Tink, there's a solid argument for any of these wolves to take the cake. Additionally, there are other wolf-like Pokemon who can fit into the mould, unlike maybe some dogs. Growlithe, Arcanine, Zacian, Zamazenta, Mightyena, Poochyena, or even Absol. Wolves have an abundance to choose from. And that's it! Of course now, we already know which team has been promoted to the Premier League through the Championship Playoff Finals, and as such, we can complete our 20 with finding a Pokemon to represent Sunderland. With its nickname, we also have an abundance who can be represented as a cat of some kind. From Litten to Umbreon, Luxray to Liepard, Purloin to Meowth. Additionally, Sunderland's history is rich in maritime tradition and industrial growth. Founded as a fishing settlement, it evolved into a major shipbuilding and port city, particularly known for its shipbuilding prowess in the 18th and 19th centuries, so any kind of fish could even do the trick, unlike Magikarp or Goldeen. However, what if we mix the two together? Why not have a catfish? That wouldn't be too much of a stretch, mixing the club's nickname with its own history. So, if it were me to choose who represents Sunderland, Briscash could pip to the top of that metric. Ultimately, however, everything I've talked about and discussed doesn't matter. Pokemon doesn't exist, and footballers only really care about Yu-Gi-Oh! So there's plenty up for debate in this video. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments, and let me know if there is any other Pokemon that you feel could make a better fit for each club. And again, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.